They called him a man of visions, the dreamer. But what kind of dream gives birth to an empire? It begins in the rugged valleys of Anatolia, at the edge of collapsing worlds. To the west, the Byzantine Empire, once mighty, now rotting from within. To the east, the fragmented Seljuk Turks, once conquerors, now shadows of their past. And in between, a cluster of small, uncertain principalities. Tiny states with fragile hopes of survival. From one of these, a chieftain would rise, not with wealth, not with armies, not even with a crown, but with a dream. His name was Osman. But before Osman became the father of an empire that would stretch across continents, he was nothing more than the son of a frontier warrior. His father, Ertugrul, had led his people, the Kay tribe of the Oghuz Turks, into these dangerous borderlands. They were refugees of history, seeking pasture, safety, and dignity in a world that offered them none. Osman was born in a time of chaos. He grew up hearing stories of collapsing empires, of endless wars, of the Crusaders still haunting the lands, and of Mongols whose shadow hung over every horizon. For young Osman, survival itself was uncertain. Yet, deep within, something restless stirred. And then came the dream. One night, while Osman lay asleep in the house of a holy man named Shiki Bali, he saw a vision that would change history forever. In the dream, he saw the moon rise from the chest of the sheik, and it descended into his own heart. From his body grew a great tree, whose branches spread over the world. Under its shade stretched mountains, rivers, cities, and oceans. At its base, he saw the crescent and the stars shining bright, a symbol of destiny. When Osman awoke, trembling with awe, the meaning was clear. This was not merely a dream, it was a prophecy, a sign that his destiny was not just to lead his tribe, but to build something far greater. But dreams are fragile things. To turn a vision into reality, Osman would have to fight, not just armies, but doubt, betrayal, and the limits of his own people. And so, the story begins. But prophecy alone does not build empires. Osman woke from his dream to a harsh reality. His tribe was small, his warriors few, his enemies many. The Byzantines eyed his people with suspicion. Neighboring Turkish beyliks competed for territory. And the Mongols, whose thunder still echoed across Asia, threatened to crush anyone who dared rise too high. Yet Osman possessed something far greater than armies. He had conviction. He believed his life had purpose. And that belief became his weapon. By the time Osman came of age, the borderlands were alive with tension. The Byzantines still controlled fortresses and cities, but their rule was decayed, weakened by civil wars and greed. Turkish warriors, known as Ghazis, fighters of faith, raided their lands with relentless energy. These Ghazis found in Osman a leader who combined courage with vision. He fought not simply to plunder, but to carve a future. One story tells us that Osman, still a young warrior, rode against a Byzantine lord who mocked the Turks as wandering dogs. With only a handful of horsemen, Osman struck deep into enemy territory, his speed and ferocity overwhelming forces twice his size. Victory after victory spread his name along the frontier. But Osman was not merely a raider. He was a builder of loyalty. He gathered men not just with promises of spoils, but with an idea that they were destined for something larger. He gave his warriors purpose, and in return, they gave him their lives. Yet, Osman's greatest ally would not be found on the battlefield, but in the quiet wisdom of Shiki Bali, the holy man whose daughter, Malan, Osman would one day marry. Their union symbolized more than love. It was a merging of spiritual authority with worldly ambition. With a Debilized blessing, Osman carried not only the sword, but the mantle of destiny. Still, destiny attracts enemies. As Osman's reputation grew, rival Turkish chieftains began to plot against him. Some feared his ambition. Others envied his popularity. Even his kin were not always loyal. Family feuds simmered, threatening to tear his fragile power apart. But Osman learned an important lesson early. Sometimes betrayal can be more dangerous than armies, and survival required not just strength, but cunning. He built alliances carefully, marrying politics with faith, loyalty with necessity. With Byzantines, he used both diplomacy and war. With Turks, he sometimes forged bonds, sometimes crush rivals. Every move was a calculation. And slowly, his dream began to take form. The frontier became his canvas. His tribe expanded, seizing villages, capturing fortresses, and establishing permanent control. The Byzantines underestimated him. To them, Osman was just another raider, a nuisance, nothing more. But piece by piece, Osman was laying the foundation of a state. And yet, for all his growing strength, the world beyond his borders was shifting in ways that would test him more than ever before. For the Mongols had not vanished. Their shadow loomed large, pressing down upon Anatolia, squeezing the Turks into tighter corners. Many leaders bent the knee, offering tribute, bowing in submission. But not Osman. In the face of the Mongol threat, Osman chose defiance. He would not be a servant to a distant Khan. He would be a sovereign of his own people. It was a dangerous choice. But it was also the choice of a man who believed his dream was not to serve, but to rule. The stage was now set. Osman's small principality stood between two collapsing worlds, the dying Byzantines to the west and the Mongol-overrun Seljuks to the east. And in that fragile space, he would plant the first seed of empire. But how does a dreamer with a few hundred warriors challenge empires that have stood for centuries? The answer would come in fire and blood. The Byzantines believed their walls were eternal. For centuries, their stone fortresses had defied wave after wave of enemies. Arab armies had failed. Crusaders had faltered. Turks had bled themselves dry against their towers. To them, Osman was just another barbarian chief, loud in battle, but fleeting in history. They were wrong. Osman understood something his enemies did not. Empires die slowly, not with a single blow, but with 1,000 tiny cuts. So Osman became the blade that cut again and again, each raid sharper than the last, each victory building towards something larger. One of his first great tests came at the fortress of Karakunlu, a Byzantine stronghold that guarded the frontier. With a small band of warriors, Osman surrounded it, not with brute force, but with patience. His men cut off supply lines, intercepted messengers, and bled the fortress into isolation. The siege dragged on and whispers spread. Osman was not merely raiding, he was conquering. When Karakoyunlu finally fell, it was more than a military win. It was a declaration. Osman was here to stay. But the real jewel in the frontier was Bialystok, a key Byzantine city that controlled roads and trade. Osman could not take it by force. So he turned to cunning. He hatched a daring plan. During a Byzantine wedding celebration, Osman's men disguised themselves, hiding weapons inside carts of gifts. As the city erupted in feasting, Osman struck from within. Chaos spread. Gates were thrown open, and the fortress that had stood for centuries was taken in a single night. The fall of Bialystok was a thunderclap across Anatolia. To the Byzantines, it was humiliation. To the Turks, it was inspiration. Osman had shown that not even the strongest walls could resist him. Still, the frontier was not a battlefield of sword alone. It was a chessboard of loyalties. Some Byzantine lords, weary of their empire's decline, began to defect, pledging allegiance to Osman. They saw in him not just a raider, but a rising power, perhaps even a safer bet than Constantinople itself. Every new fortress, every new ally, was a stone laid in the foundation of something greater. Osman's tribe was no longer simply surviving. It was expanding, multiplying, transforming into a state. But the Byzantines would not let him grow unchecked. Soon, word reached Osman of a coalition forming against him. Byzantine lords, allied with rival Turkish chieftains, sought to crush the upstart before his roots grew too deep. The battle that followed would become legend, the Battle of Dimbos. The Byzantines marched with a larger force, their banners shining, their armor gleaming. Osman's men were fewer, their weapons worn, their horses tired. Yet Osman's spirit was iron. He rallied his warriors with words that burned into memory. Today, we do not fight for plunder. We fight for tomorrow, for the land where our sons will live, for the dream that burns within us all. When the clash came, it was brutal. Arrows blackened the sky. Swords clashed in fury. Cries of pain echoed across the valley. Osman himself led the charge, striking at the enemy's heart. And against all odds, his men prevailed. The Byzantines broke. Their allies fled. Dimbos was more than a victory. It was a prophecy fulfilled in blood. Osman was no longer a mere tribal chief. He was becoming something else, a sovereign. The world was beginning to notice. But empires do not rise without enemies noticing too. Far beyond the battlefields of Anatolia, whispers of Osman's victories reached Constantinople itself. The Byzantine court, still seated in its marble palaces, could no longer ignore the dreamer at their gates. Plans for a reckoning began to stir. And yet, Osman's greatest challenges would not come only from enemies abroad. They would come from within, from betrayals, from tragedies, and from the weight of turning a fragile principality into an empire. The dream was alive. But dreams, Osman knew, could also die. When Osman gave his final wish, "Bury me at Bursa," it was more than a request. It was a challenge, a command to his son, his warriors, and to history itself. At the time, Bursa stood proud as one of Byzantium's most important cities. Its walls were thick, its wealth immense, its people loyal to Constantinople. To even imagine its fall was audacious. But Osman was never a man of half-dreams. He believed the impossible could be made inevitable. And so, the siege of Bursa began. For years, Orhan, carrying his father's legacy, encircled the city. This was not the swift strike of a raider, but the patient strangling of an empire's jewel. Osman, weakened by illness, could no longer take part, but from his sickbed, he asked daily of the progress. His eyes, though clouded by age, still shone with the fire of a man who knew his dream was within reach. In 1326, the fortress that had defied army for centuries finally bent the knee. Bursa fell, not with great battle, but with surrender, worn down by Osman's vision and Orhan's persistence. The crescent banner was raised over its towers, and the city became the beating heart of the Ottoman dream. True to his command, Osman was carried to Bursa and laid to rest. His tomb still stands today, overlooking the city he never lived to rule, but always believed he would. To the people of his time, it was the closing of one chapter. To history, it was the opening of another, the dawn of the Ottoman Empire. But who was Osman beyond the battles, the fortresses, the dream? Chroniclers describe him as a man of simple habits, but immense charisma. He ate with his warriors, sharing the same bread, never separating himself with pomp or luxury. His tent was plain, his garments modest. Yet when he spoke, men listened. There was gravity in his voice, conviction in his eyes, and a strange blend of gentleness and ferocity in his character. He was known for his sense of justice. Osman often repeated a phrase to his men: "An empire without justice cannot stand." He would punish theft and cruelty within his ranks as severely as he punished his enemies on the battlefield. For Osman understood a truth many leaders ignored, that conquest wins lands, but justice wins hearts. And it was hearts that he conquered as much as territories. Villagers under Byzantine rule, weary of heavy taxes and corruption, often welcomed Osman's forces. They saw in him a leader who protected the weak, rewarded loyalty, and respected faith. It was this, perhaps even more than a sword, that allowed Osman to transform raids into permanence, and permanence into statehood. But Osman was also a man of contradictions. He could be merciful, pardoning enemies who submitted, yet he could also be ruthless, crushing rebellions with unforgiving force. He was both dreamer and pragmatist, willing to cloak his ambition in faith, but never hesitating to use cunning, deception, or even brutality when the dream demanded it. This balance between vision and realism, mercy and ruthlessness, was what made him more than a tribal chief. It made him a founder. When Osman died in 1324, few in the world took notice. To the great courts of Europe, he was just another Turk chieftain on a distant frontier. To the Mongols, he was a minor irritant. To Byzantium, a dangerous foe, but still a provincial one. And yet, within just a century of his death, his descendants would be marching into Europe, shattering kingdoms and rewriting maps. Within 2 centuries, they would stand at the gates of Constantinople itself, toppling the ancient Byzantine Empire. Within 3, they would rule an empire stretching from Hungary to Arabia, from the Persian frontier to North Africa, and all of it bore his name. The Ottomans, Osmanli, were not merely his bloodline. They were his dream, given flesh across continents and centuries. Historians often debate how much of this Osman could have foreseen. Did he truly believe his small principality would one day become the greatest empire of its age? Or was he simply fighting for survival, and history magnified his ambition after the fact? Perhaps the truth lies in the dream itself. Osman may not have known the exact shape of the future, but he believed in its possibility. He believed that from his tree would grow branches far beyond his lifetime. And belief, as history shows us again and again, can be the most powerful weapon of all. The story of Osman is the story of transformation, from exile to ruler, from raider to founder, from dreamer to legend. He began with nothing but a vision and ended by creating a destiny that outlived him by centuries. 600 years after his death, the empire he founded would only then begin to fade. But Osman's dream never truly died. It lingers still, in the stones of Bursa, in the pages of history, in the whispers of every empire builder who dares to dream of more. For history remembers many conquerors, but only a few dreamers who built empires.